6. The good husband. A believing man must never hate a believing woman. If he dislikes one trait in her, he will find another trait in her with which to be pleased. Hadith in Muslim. Respect can never be gained by simply telling someone to respect you. Respect has to be earned by how you speak and how you act, in other words, through the total message of what you are. It is absolutely vital in a good Islamic marriage that the wife respect her husband, otherwise the marriage is going to be a miserable business. Since one of the basic ground rules of Islamic marriage is that the husband is the imam and the head of the household, he has to prove himself worthy of that position. It is not true that a Muslim wife is expected to obey her husband in every single thing he says. There is a very important proviso. If the husband attempts to order her to do anything that clashes with Islam, it is her duty not to obey him, but to point this out tactfully and gently and to change his orders. Therefore, if the wife is to respect her man, he must do his utmost to be worthy of and to merit that respect. Many women, particularly in these days of women's lib, wonder why it is that a man should ever be considered as head of the household. Most women know that most men have very little to do with the housework and routine side of things. Some of them leave all the financial control of day-to-day expenditure to their wives, and sometimes even more important, financial planning. It is the mother who usually has most to do with things as important and varied as training the children in good manners and sound belief and seeing that there is food to eat in the house, and things as trivial as seeing that there is a clean shirt, a pair of socks, that things are picked up and put away, that toilets get cleaned, and so forth. Once women have learned how to cope with all this, many of them do not see why they should regard their husbands as the head of the household. In Islam, this concession to the man is of vital importance. It is part of God's plan, part of His ordinance. It was ordained long before the revelation to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. It was stressed in Christianity as well. For instance, in one Christian text we read, "Let wives be in subjection to their husbands as if to the Lord, because a husband is head of his wife as Christ is head of the congregation." Ephesians 5:22-24. In His final religion, Allah has requested that wives obey their husbands and pay them respect in every matter that does not conflict with His will. Indeed, the Holy Prophet once said that if it had been possible for him to order a human being to bow down to any other human being, he would have asked wives to bow down to their husbands. He could not ask this, of course, for only God has that privilege and right. But it pointed to his deep desire for a happy family relationship in which the husband was definitely the boss. However, before wives close this book in irritation and accuse it of blindly supporting rampant male chauvinism, the view that men are always superior to women, because that is the way things are, let us make it quite clear that chauvinism and arrogance and refusal to listen to the other's point of view have nothing to do with Islam. A good Muslim husband is not chauvinistic or arrogant or puffed up with his own opinion of himself. He is also under authority. Don't forget the highest authority of all. That authority has commanded him to be humble, modest, gentle, kind, and compassionate. It has not required him to go bumbling around issuing orders right, left, and center, the whole object of which might seem to be to get out of doing work himself, or to see all the activities of the members of his household centered around his own comforts and pleasures. Muslim husbands have the blessed Prophet himself as their example, and they are expected to try to be like him. And to the extent that they succeed in being like him, do we find the respect issuing naturally from their Muslim wives. The more civil and kind a Muslim is to his wife, the more perfect in faith he is, and the more worthy of being her leader. Most men, when they first marry, have to learn how to take hold of that position of authority. They have usually not been in such a position before, but were merely young men in someone else's household. They may never have held the position of boss at work, or in the office, or in the factory. They may have little or no idea about public relations, exercises, and tactics, and so may well go blundering into terrible staff revolts, strikes, and other difficulties and dissatisfactions. The new husband has to realize that when he has just been promoted to a position of boss of a household, he has to learn the skills, or he will encounter the same staff problems. Let us consider a few of them. First and foremost, I suppose, the workers like to see their boss being fair, honest, and of sound judgment. These things are absolutely vital. The moment a boss is known to be unfair, incapable, or dishonest, he is in for big trouble. People will see nothing wrong in their own dishonesty, getting away with whatever they can. Honesty is the key. Without it, the rest of one's religion is worthless. How can a wife truly respect her husband or vice versa when she knows he lies, fakes illness, fiddles the tax returns, or even pinches things? People make long prayers to Allah, although their food is haram, their drink is haram, and their clothes are haram. How can their prayers be accepted? Hadith in Muslim and Tirmidhi. Imam al-Ghazali records, when a certain man went out of his house, his wife and his daughter would say to him, "Beware of illegal earning, for we can endure hunger and hardship, but we cannot endure the fire." As for the incapable boss, once workers take the point of view that he is an idiot who is going to make a mess of things, they start looking out for themselves to make sure that they at least come out of it all right. Next, the boss must never exploit his workforce or expect unreasonable things of them. Loyal workers will labor way over and above the call of duty for a manager who is decent, just, and gives them fair reward. Once they begin to feel exploited, trouble starts. The first thought is usually to consider if it is worthwhile financially continuing in such a job, if one is slaving away all hours for a pittance, and others are getting preferential treatment over you, and so on. He who cheats us is not one of us Muslim. There are so many forms of exploitation in the workplace, and there are so many in marriage. The husband who is out at work from, say, 9 to 5, and then comes home and puts his feet up for the rest of the evening, while his wife continues to work, has forgotten something. She was also working 9 to 5, and very likely started long before that. This applies not only when the wife has a job outside the house, but also when she is working in the house. Many men find this hard to grasp, for some reason. The simple way to prove it would be for the wife to leave him for a few weeks and let the household run down, as it would swiftly do, and then suggest that perhaps the husband should sort it out by hiring someone to come and take over the wife's jobs. As we have seen, it was not the Prophet's sunnah to sit back and watch his wives getting exhausted in his service. The boss that really draws out loyalty from his staff is the one who shows his own self-sacrifice. He is prepared to get his hands dirty. He will not ask anyone to do what he would not be prepared to do himself. An employer should not ask a worker to do anything beyond his capacity. If that which the employer demands is necessary, then he himself should lend a helping hand to the worker buckery. He will not sit behind the closed door with his feet on the desk, but will be a worker alongside the other workers, bearing in mind his rank and job differentials, of course. He will not exploit or abuse his staff, and very important, he will pay them their due, justly and in good time. The blessed Prophet was very clear on all this. Give the worker his wage before his sweat dries, Ibn Majah. Husbands usually understand all this as regards their place of employment, but many need to realize that the main worker within the family is the wife. She must never be taken for granted, for her payment is so often not money at all, but being noticed, appreciated, and loved. Due to his imperfection and selfishness, there are many times when the husband, while wanting very much to be respected as the head of the family, fails to show the needed consideration and love to his wife, and thus shoots himself in the foot. No matter how much a man may actually love his wife, if he doesn't show it, she will not feel loved. No matter how much he does appreciate her, if he doesn't show it, she will not feel appreciated. She may deduce from his attitude that the only things that matter to him are his own pleasure and satisfaction. Among my followers, the best of men are those who are best to their wives, and the best of women are those who are best to their husbands. To each of such women is set down a reward equivalent to the reward of 1,000 martyrs. Among my followers again, the best of women are those who assist their husbands in their work, and love them dearly for everything, save what is transgression of Allah's laws. Cited in Doi, Women in Sharia 9. What else makes bosses unpopular with the workers when they are domineering? To gain respect, a man has to show himself steady and strong and able to take decision. But that does not mean that no one else is ever to be consulted, or that no one else's opinion counts, or that the wife's opinion should never be seriously considered because it doesn't happen to agree with the husband's. Of course, This does not mean that a husband has to put himself out all the time, making himself a slave to his wife's wishes. A domineering wife is worse than a domineering husband. Moreover, wives do not usually appreciate a man who abuses his position of headship by leaving everything to her and passing over to her all the decision making. When that happens, the wife soon begins to wonder what use the husband is and whether she might not actually manage better without him. If the answer to the question, "What is your husband for?" is along the lines of making a mess, creating chores and problems, filling up space, making you do things you don't want to do, and creating a lot of work you wouldn't have to do if he was not there, then sooner or later a woman is going to wonder why she is doing this, and the marriage is on the rocks. Men are the protectors and maintainers of women because God has given the one more strength and because they spend of their property. Therefore, righteous women are the obedient, guarding in the husband's absence what God has guarded for 34. The man has to show the protection, the maintenance, and the strength before he receives the obedience and the cooperation. Just because a man is head of the household does not mean that he is issuing commands at every hour of the day. Usually, it simply means that when the two of them at times disagree and a row threatens, he has a casting vote. The husband does not always have to give in to his wife's wishes, but he is a fool if he does not listen to her reasons why she wants a certain thing doing or wants it doing a certain way. Good Muslim husbands and wives both realize that everyone is capable of making mistakes, of not being perfect, and both should consider each other's rights and requests with an open mind and humility. The Prophet, peace be upon him, emphasized this time and time again. A modern Nigerian scholar remarks, "It is a fact, however, that sound administration within the domestic sphere is impossible without a unified policy. For this reason, the Sharia requires a man, as head of the family, to consult with his family and then have the final say in decisions concerning it. In doing so, he must not abuse his prerogative to cause any injury to his wife. Any transgression of this principle involves for him the risk of losing the favor of Allah because his wife is not his subordinate, but she is, to use the words of the Prophet, the queen of the house, and this is the position a true believer is expected to give his wife Doi, Women in Sharia 10. Even if the man has more responsibility than the woman and therefore has a degree over her, this does not necessarily make him better than his wife. How can you tell if you are being a good husband? What does a good husband have to do? Well, he has to be a good provider to the best of his ability. Islam is very keen on men earning, striving and supporting, and not depending on others. What a man spends on his family is a sadaqah, and a man will be rewarded. Even for the morsel that he raises to his wife's lips, Bukhari and Muslim. He is not one of us who possesses money, but keeps his family away from his wealth. Mustadrak. A celibate man once told a scholar, "God has given me a share in every good work," and he mentioned the Hajj, the Jihad, and so on. "How far you still remain," replied the scholar, "from the work of the Saints Abdul." "And what is that?" "Legitimate earning and supporting a family." Ghazali. Supporting a wife is not only a training and a discipline, but also a providing and a caring and a form of worship in its own right. Ghazali. A man's wife and family have material needs, and things cost money. It is a poor husband who keeps his pay packet to himself if the wife has no independent financial means of support. It is very galling for most women to be forced to ask their husbands for a bottle of scent, or new underwear, or new clothes for the children, let alone adequate finances to buy the food and pay the bills. Husbands should be alert to the cost of living and make sure that the allowances they give their wives are reasonable. If the husband just hands over the barest minimum and keeps everything else for his own pleasure, this is not fair. He can only do this by having a wife who is a slave worker and not a wife. Once again, it would be a good exercise for him to work out how much it would cost him to replace his wife with hired help. Being a good provider also means that the husband should not waste his money or fritter it away. Obviously, a man cannot be blamed for being a poor man if it is not his fault, but he can be blamed for being idle and greedy and mean and selfish. In the Western world, many wives are disappointed by husbands who waste their earnings on alcohol, gambling, and nights out with the boys. Muslim husbands should obviously not do this, but if the husband innocently goes out 3 or 4 times a week to a hired sports center, he should consider what he is allowing his wife for her relaxation, and whether his use of time and expenditure is fair. A wife who notices her husband spending all his time and money on things like indoor sports is not going to be very thrilled with him for long, as she sits at home alone darning the socks. Muslims should learn to live within their means, and this is often difficult for a new husband and wife. It is so easy to get into debt, especially in modern societies that encourage you to live now, pay later. Muslim couples should be awake to the fact that if they live foolishly and irresponsibly, they will indeed pay later, and not just in cash. The true believers are those who, when they spend, are neither prodigal nor miserly, and there is always a firm standing place between the 225-67. At the same time, they must take care not to become materialistic. There are things which are more important than keeping up with the neighbors and having all the latest expensive gadgetry and cars. Riches are a temptation and a snare. So many sayings of the Prophet peace be upon him point this out. Riches are sweet and a source of blessing to those who acquire them by the way, but those who seek them out of greed are like people who eat but are never full bakari. It is not poverty which I fear for you. It is that you might begin to desire the world as others before you desired it, so that it destroys you as it destroyed them, Bakari and Muslim. The love of money is the source of all wickedness, Bayhaqi. Richness does not consist in the abundance of worldly goods. Richness is the richness of the soul, Muslim. No matter what wonderful possessions a materialistic way of life may bring, they can never compensate for the pain of seeing family relationships weaken and break down. What is the point of spending so much time at work in order to gain the physical things of life that you have no time or energy left for the spiritual things, and no time or energy to build up love and compassion and friendship in your household? It is up to the husband, as head of the house, to be alert to this and make sure he is doing his spiritual and loving duty. Yes, he should work hard to provide the physical needs of his household, but he should put his ultimate effort not into riches and material things which will pass away, but into the service of God through loving his wife and family, teaching them, and building up their spiritual lives together. Nobody shall meet God with a sin greater than that of having left his family in ignorance. Imam Dalami, it is vital to realize that this means praying together often, which is actually one of the things so appreciated by Muslim wives who, with the decline of the extended family, so frequently have to pray alone. It is such a lovely thing to kneel behind the head of your house, your husband Imam, and worship with him from time to time. However, your husband Imam must also bear in mind the principles taught by the blessed Prophet himself, who made his prayers fit the needs and necessities and hardships of the congregation behind him. I stand up to pray and I intend to pray at length, but when I hear the cry of a child, I shorten it for fear that the mother might be distressed, Bakari and Muslim. Prayer is not meant to be done out of duty or boredom, but out of love. The fiqh of Islam, carrying out the ritual details, is one aspect only. And no less important aspect is the inner dimension of faith, the tasawwuf, which brings spiritual insights and true devotion of the heart. If a husband is obsessed only with the fiqh outward aspect, whereas his wife is drawn more towards the tasawwuf inner dimension, then here is an opportunity for the devil to creep in between them. For there is a natural tendency for each side to think that their own preoccupation is the best. The tasawwuf worshipper will have a loving awareness of God's presence throughout the day, and as well as performing the basic obligations will pray in short or long bursts of great personal devotion. The worshipper limited only to the fiqh will regard it as beneficial to perform as correctly as possible and earn merit by increasing non-compulsory prayers and rakat. But what Islam requires is that we combine the two. Both fiqh and tasawwuf are dangerous without each other. The inner form of the soul during the prayer and the outward arrangement of the body must be in harmony. The heart must prostrate as well as the body. One fruit of this balanced spiritual activity will be that each spouse is able always to consider the hopes and faith of the other and to be open-hearted. One partner should not be so preoccupied with his or her own spiritual progress that they fail to show sincere concern for the other. If the husband does not give sufficient attention to his wife's spiritual needs, then in time she may no longer cherish the same goals that he does. If parents do not take enough personal interest in the spiritual growth of their children, they may find their hearts and minds being drawn away by the materialistic world which surrounds them. This will be almost inevitable unless they take the trouble to explain not only the whats but also the whys of Islam. Finally, it is very important for a boss to show respect and honor to his workforce. They are not slaves, they are living beings with their own hopes and feelings, fears and frustrations. This applies particularly to husbands honoring their wives in a sexual relationship, about which more will be said shortly. So much frigidity and lack of interest on the part of wives is caused by husbands who are ignorant of a woman's physical and emotional makeup. Some husbands are harsh and demanding, satisfy their own needs without considering those of their wives, demand sex when their wives are tired or feeling ill, or when they have earlier upset them and put them right out of the mood. They have not grasped the words of the blessed Prophet who counseled men not to leap upon their women like animals, but to send a messenger first. He also used to say that a man who beat his wife like a slave during the day could hardly expect her to fall happily into his arms later that night. By a simple process of analogy, one must extend this hadith to those men who treat their women like slaves. The same applies, they will only gain disappointment and resentment, not love. Muslim men should obviously not look outside their own home for sexual enjoyment of any kind. If they did, that would certainly not be honoring their wives. The Prophet, peace be upon him, wisely said on one occasion, "Whenever any one of you comes across an attractive woman, and his heart is inclined towards her, he should go straight to his wife and have sexual intercourse with her, so that he might keep himself away from evil thoughts." Muslim. The husband who honors his wife does not treat her as an inferior being. The Prophet, peace be upon him, told men to feed their wives with the same sort of food as they received themselves, not obliging them to give them the best all the time, while the wife gets the leftovers, and clothing them with the same sort of clothes. In other words, if the husband likes expensive and stylish things, he should not spend so much on himself that his wife is reduced to hunting around for cheap bargains and making do. The principle is fairness. Yes, the husband may have earned the money, but the woman has made it possible for him, and she has rights over it. You shall give her to eat when you take your food, and you shall clothe her when you clothe yourself. Hadith from Abu Dawud. If the wife falls short of expectations, it is stupid to treat her harshly and make her life unpleasant. Try to improve matters by tact and gentleness and encouragement, as you would like others to do for you when you fall short. Don't start trying to run the kitchen or the household yourself, pushing her out of the way and making her feel embarrassed and small. Bosses who do that to their workers soon find their staff depressed and in revolt, and they usually walk out sooner or later. Far better to communicate, train gently, explain things, and make appreciative noises when things are going right. Whichever man is patient with the bad character of his wife shall be given a reward like unto that which Job shall receive. And whichever woman is patient with the bad character of her husband shall be given the same reward as Asiya, the saintly wife of Pharaoh. Al-Ghazali. Love may be based on many things, but to be of true value, it must go beyond mere human affection or mutual desire, and be governed by what is for the highest good of the loved one. That kind of love can sometimes call for reproving or disciplining, just as a parent reproves or disciplines a much-loved child. But in Islam, it is important to be long-suffering and kind. Even when a situation provokes you, and perhaps unfair accusations are being made, you must show restraint and generosity. Remember the saying, "The true Muslim is like the earth. Everything foul is thrown upon it, but only what is beautiful grows from it." True love is not impatient or picky. It is not jealous or suspicious or possessive. Those things are signs of insecurity, fed by the imagination, and should be watched out for. It is so easy to see other people's faults and failings, and so hard to acknowledge them in ourselves. But if we are good Muslims, we must make the attempt. As a hadith says, "Blessed is he who is so concerned by his own faults that he cannot see the faults of others." Dalami. True love does not behave indecently or with vulgarity. A good husband or wife does not discuss the shortcomings or intimate skills of their spouse with others, which would be so hurtful if found not. Nobody likes being laughed at, especially for things which are personal and private. The blessed Prophet said, "On the day of judgment, the lowest person in the sight of God will be the man who is intimate with his wife and then broadcasts her secrets." Hadith narrated by Muslim. And Imam al-Nawawi says, "Know that a husband should never discuss sexual matters with any of his wife's relatives." This principle applies even after a divorce. Imam al-Ghazali tells a story about a pious man who wanted to divorce his wife and was asked, "What have you against her?" He answered, "A man of understanding does not reveal his wife's secret." After the divorce, he was asked why he had divorced her, but he merely said, "What business of mine is another man's wife?" The good husband comes home from work tired, but he does not forget his duties and his love for his family. He may not be in the least eager to chatter and needs to take rest, but his wife may have been treasuring some detail to tell him all day. And whereas he may have been surrounded by adults to whom he could talk and enjoy conversation, she may have had no one to talk to but the baby, the cat, and the curtains. Honor the rights of your wife and be kind. And what about the children? If the father makes no time for them and fails to teach them to respect their mother by his own attitude towards her and treatment of her, then sooner or later he will pay the price for it. Children need to see their parents' love and respect for each other, their united cooperation, and their willingness to help each other. Phrases like "wait until your father gets home" and "go ask your mother" inevitably cast the person who has to do the disciplining or has to say no in the role of villain. If there is to be family happiness, each parent should receive the child's love and respect. On no account should mother and father allow a child to pit one against the other, a skill they pick up very easily, sad to say. If children are expected to respect their parents, then the parents must live in such a way that they are deserving of respect and provide a good example for the child to follow. Selfishness, bad temper, unreasonableness, laziness, dishonesty, abusiveness, these are all qualities swiftly picked up and copied by children. Earn respect by providing a peaceful and loving Muslim home, a good set of standards, a good and consistent example in your own conduct, sound training in manners and morals, and loving and gentle discipline when needed. Children learn about love by seeing it, and they learn to give love by receiving it. Love cannot be bought. Neglectful parents may shower gifts upon their spouses and children, but to try to buy love only cheapens it. It is not gifts, but your time, your energy, and your love that are needed giving, helping, serving, sharing. Watch out for that big person replacer, the TV screen. TV watching and computer games can become an addiction which replaces doing and living with merely seeing, and most of that seeing is pretty rubbishy, especially mass-produced children's programs. It also replaces talking together and playing together. In some cases, it even replaces communication while eating together. One day, you might switch the screen off and find out that your whole family has changed, grown old, and maybe fallen apart. Never underestimate the bonding value of the family meal. Sufyan al-Thawri said, "I have heard that God and His angels bless a family that eats together. All human beings need some recognition, to be accepted and approved, to feel that they belong. To get those things, of course, the individual must bear in mind the whole group to which he or she belongs, and to feel valuable, they must contribute to it. Children must learn to take responsibility, to belong to and support the family, and eventually do things for themselves so that they will be able in due course to support their parents and set up families for themselves." Many of these matters are discussed in SR. Ruqaiyyah's living with teenagers, for heaven's sake, the challenge of Islam for boys, and for love of Islam for girls. Finally, the little extra touches can really lift up a humdrum relationship. The Blessed Prophet said, "Even to put a morsel of food into your wife's mouth is a sadaqah Bukhari and Muslim." This indicates the kind of tenderness which should exist in a Muslim marriage. The squeeze, the arm around the shoulder, the touch of the hand, the pinch on the cheek, the little gifts that show you have thought about your wife during the day, these are the messengers that really get the message across. There is no woman who removes something to replace it in its proper place with a view to tidying her husband's house,
but that Allah records it as a virtue for her. Nor is there a man who walks with his wife hand in hand, but that Allah sets it down as a virtue for him. And if he put his arm round her shoulder in love, his virtue is increased tenfold. Doi, Women in Sharia 10.
No husband or wife is ever perfect, but when a husband shows love and thought for his wife and acts in accordance with the principles of Islam, he will surely earn not only her love and respect, but that of Allah Himself. 7. Celebrating the difference. And the male is not like the female. 336. There is no doubt that when Allah created that single soul, and from it derived the first couple, woman was not just a revised model of man, and the differences, far from being the product of chance or random whim, were the wise and compassionate workings of our Creator, who exquisitely designed each half of the pair to complement the other physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. They had certain things in common and an absolutely fundamental range of differences. It is true that there are plenty of sensitive men and coldly logical women. Nevertheless, it does seem that when it comes down to working out the mechanics of helping men and women to live together smoothly as husband and wife, it is a good idea to remind the hopeful newlyweds that they are not the same at all. It is easier to solve a lot of the problems if one remembers the saying that women come from Venus and men come from Mars. Just like visitors from two different planets, husbands and wives don't always speak the same language, or understand the same consequences from a course of action, or look at a problem through the eyes of someone from the same background. Quite apart from the gender gap, which has been carved into the chromosomes of every single cell in the body, one obvious factor is that the two partners have come into their marriage from two different families with entirely different past tracks. Since experiences in childhood play so important a role in shaping our thinking and attitudes in adulthood, there will be unknown depths to deal with, and conflicting views will inevitably break surface from time to time. When both partners come from a very similar background, sharing the same religious beliefs and practices and aims, the problems are greatly reduced, but they are not done away with entirely. Much depends on what happened to them as individual boys and girls. Men who get a frequent blasting of the repeat tunes, "You don't love me," "You never listen to me," "You don't care how I feel," need to ask themselves why it is that their wives are feeling so insecure. Are they really lacking in love or not communicating that love? A wife who knows that she is very dear to her husband feels warm and safe inside. However, if a wife had a cold and inadequate father who did not give her adequate emotional support as a child, or one who despised his wife and treated her abusively as if she was a fool or a servant, then when she is off guard, low and tired, she may have an overwhelming need for approval and reassurance that has nothing to do with her husband. The perplexed husband cries, "But I could tell her I love her 100 times, and it still wouldn't be enough." This, unfortunately, is true, but understanding why might help alleviate his irritation and bafflement. It is a good idea for husbands and wives to try to see each other from the perspective of their pasts rather than their own. This is particularly important when the partner has been systematically humiliated and cruelly treated or abused physically or sexually by a parent or guardian, or was unwanted. You cannot undo the past, nor completely cure its effects, but you can do a very great deal to heal a distressed mate, or at least comfort them in love. Instead of downplaying the neglect or abuse, even though you may not have experienced it personally, you should not underrate their anguish, but acknowledge their past and give your support. Therefore, it is only fair. Of course, if the hurt partner makes sure the other fully understands the problem, so far as he or she is able to communicate it. At a time when emotions are not heated, discuss your feelings, explain why you feel hurt and what you need in order to feel reassured. Hurt people have such a natural tendency to summon up all the traumas from the past and use them as emotional weaponry when they get into arguments. Whenever you hear "it's all your fault," "you shouldn't be able to do this," or the deadly "you always never do remember that," you are probably dealing with a ghost from the past. Husbands or wives who use this kind of phraseology do not mean it really. The statements are provably not true, but there is an old accumulated hang-up of deep feeling here. It doesn't take much to restimulate all that old pain.
These husbands and wives should try to rephrase themselves assertively in terms of how they feel about whatever it is, rather than an accusation of what the other is or is not doing.
When you do that, I feel unloved, misunderstood is much more dealable with than you don't love me or you never understand me. It is a very good idea to get out a book on basic assertiveness training and have a look into its insights and skills. Most managers who work smoothly with their staff do this, they are sent on courses. It wouldn't hurt those trying to run a good, smooth marriage to know some of the same techniques. For a wife to feel dearly loved, much more is required than just being pleased that she has been able to submit successfully to her husband's will. He could have a horse or a dog that is well trained, submissive, and never argues back. But people need real companionship and helpmates to work and live with. What a husband needs is a wife who not only loves and respects him, but becomes also a real helper and genuinely supports him in the decisions he makes. This, of course, is not difficult when those decisions are arrived at following mutual agreement and are on the right road of Islam. Things are not quite so easy when you genuinely disagree. What then? Would your wife then do her best to make your decision work, provided it was not against the will of Allah, or would she hold back stubbornly and hope to see you make a mess of it, and then enjoy the pleasures of "I told you so"? A good Muslim wife will not try to usurp her husband's headship of the family. Many women do, of course, and many of them succeed, wearing down their men through constant nagging or a constant display of their brilliant efficiency, as opposed to the faults and inadequacies of their husbands. It makes those women very difficult to live with, and it steadily erodes the woman's genuine respect for her man. Constant criticism generally produces an uncertain, indecisive husband. Don't you remember how those critical, humiliating teachers at school made their pupils feel? They didn't teach them much, but turned them into stupid kids who could never get anything right, who ended up either keeping their heads down or aggressively rebelling. Wives who can see nothing but their husband's inadequacies need to remember how difficult it is for them to carry out their role as leader and how easy it is to go wrong. Providing the couple have arrived at their decisions with proper consultation and thoughtfulness, the wife should cover the faults and weaknesses and mistakes of her husband and do her best to boost his confidence, not knock him down. Her loyalty and trust in him will all serve to strengthen him and ensure that he improves in skills and moves towards success. After all, a good Muslim man should be her best friend, nor her enemy. When friends disagree with one another, the decision maker who proved to be wrong will soon dump any friend who crowed and laughed at him, or who continually tried to bring him down or belittle him. This is another reason, of course, why a woman should be so careful when choosing a husband. She should take great care to marry the sort of man that she is going to respect and be able to obey without feeling dreadfully trapped or helpless or frustrated by knowing all the time that his leadership will not be up to scratch. It can be dangerous when wives start to act like the husband's mother. Don't forget your briefcase. You idiot, you didn't forget so and so, did you? Once the husband starts to feel patronized and henpecked by this, he may revert to the little boys longing to escape through the door and get out to play. There is also the very real danger that he will really start to identify his wife with his mother, and since mother probably spoiled him rotten, the wife may not come out of the comparison too well.
Wives should remember the wise old saying, a man can love 100 women, but he only has one mother. Turn a wife into a substitute mother, and a husband might soon start wishing he had not swapped her for the real one.
One regular flashpoint in marriage comes when the husband walks in to find a wife in tears, in a mood, angry, desperate with worry, or whatever, and he listens for a bit, decides it is trivial stuff, mutters something, and then goes off to think about his own problems. Meanwhile, the wife explodes with "you don't love me," and "you don't listen to me." What she has perhaps failed to realize is that his withdrawal has nothing to do with her, or anything she has said or done. He is still involved in his own fears, insecurities, and pains, and perhaps even needs to lick his wounds.
He doesn't intend to worry her with his problems, so it seems doubly hard to be accused of not caring about hers.
It is usually a highly noticeable feature of a good marriage that when husband and wife meet each other again after a day apart, they greet each other properly and pay attention to each other for a few moments. Husbands need to be aware that a perfunctory peck on the cheek does not count in the wife's eyes as paying attention, and may not satisfy a strong need she has for emotional reconnection. Women are from Venus, the saying goes, and men are from Mars. When men listen, they usually do it swiftly, absorbing the information, working out what to do about it, assessing its importance. At work, many men prefer to work out solutions on their own and discuss them only with those whose advice they really need. Some like to get away from the problem for a while and return to it later. When they get home, they often appreciate solitude, and this is where many wives fail to show understanding and appreciation. Some wives handle a man's need for peace and solitude badly. They intuitively sense the tension and react by trying to get him to tell them what it is all about. The husband may find the thought of his wife knowing about it intrusive and humiliating, and may not wish to talk to her about it, but to keep her and his home haven out of it. It would take far too long to explain all the ins and outs to her anyway, and he doesn't want to waste his evening. He doesn't want an hour of his wife mulling it over for him. He wants some peace. Yet, the more he backs off either to get peace or to think his problems through alone, there she is trotting behind him in hot pursuit, still pressing to know what's wrong and wanting him to talk about it. When he manages to shut her up or to escape, the wife feels hurt, unloved, and left out. Partly because he has not paid any attention to her problems or appearance, or the food that she has got ready, and partly because he has not shared his worry with her. He has excluded her, as her friends would not have done. This must mean that he does not love her, and the poor man, once he has had enough of chewing over the problem, turns back to the loving wife he had set on one side for the moment, only to find her seething with resentment and full of hurt and anger. Men are from Mars. Women are from Venus. Communication is vital. The man has to tell his wife that he needs some peace to think things through, and that of course he does love her. He just doesn't want to burden her with something from work. When she still cries words that mean "but why? Aren't I your best friend?" then the best deflection of wrath is the kiss and the undivided attention he can give to her feelings. It doesn't have to be for long, just long enough for her to note it and acknowledge it. A lot of husband-wife bickering happens not because they disagree, but simply because the man feels criticized and humiliated, and that his wife disapproves of his point of view, while the wife disapproves merely of the way he is talking to her. Let's just think about some good listening skills, another thing managers frequently learn on courses. Active listening is a way of making sure that both speaker and listener really understand each other. You have to pay careful attention and pick out the important message which may be underlying and not on the surface. Try to work out what feelings are involved and acknowledge them. Try not to judge, criticize, or dispute until you are sure of what the speaker really intended to put across. Let the speaker confirm that, and if you got it wrong, let them explain again. If what you are hearing is criticism, then don't boil over there may be truth in that criticism, but it was simply unloaded on you in a way that was painful. Instead of just throwing the pain back on your critic, try to diffuse the situation by acknowledging that you understand whatever upset feelings you may be held responsible for, and try to work out how you could improve the situation. If you really feel that you are justified in a complaint, try to work out how you can best deal with it without starting a war. You may feel that your partner was being inconsiderate, thoughtless, unwise, arrogant, chauvinistic, etc., but probably he or she did not mean to be. State your feelings without making sweeping accusations, and try to phrase your comments as talk about yourself and not attacks on your spouse. Remember that the ego is always enjoining Evil 12:53. When you did that, I felt. This does not accuse your partner, but simply states how you felt. He or she cannot argue with that. They might be very surprised, since they probably never intended to upset you at all. If you simply charge in with "you always" or "you never," then the person being attacked will frequently just deny it or justify themselves, and the grievance for which you hope to find a solution might be deflected into just another battle over an irrelevant detail of speech. "Will you please stop harassing me?" is an attack. When you did that, or said that, "I felt very harassed" is not. It is a statement that presents a problem to the other person, which he or she may be required to solve. When people know that particular actions or words have particular effects, then if they still persist in doing them, they will have to take responsibility for the result. When you always stay out with your friends, leaving me alone, or you don't come to bed until I'm asleep, it makes me feel very unloved. It shakes the love I feel for you, and I am beginning to feel resentment and dislike instead. Either the man will clock into his work mode of here is a problem to be solved, what must I do? Or he will not care less, in which case, why are you still married to him? Sometimes the partner really needs to be told that if they keep on doing or saying something, the spouse will not feel loved or wanted, and may indeed cease to love or want them. Take a personal and embarrassing example. Suppose the husband deliberately and thoughtlessly breaks wind in bed. She may be excruciatingly embarrassed, unable to speak to him about what she interprets as a fearful insult, and bitterly resent and hate it. If she does not tell him, there will come a day when this action, which the man perhaps sees as a normal and natural need, really makes her despise his lack of thought for her, and the marriage is thenceforth doomed. It might seem a small, trivial matter to the husband, but then women are from Venus, men are from Mars. When women talk, good listening skills are the key to the husband's success. In a non-extended family, the wife is dependent upon the husband for emotional support. She does not usually want to make decisions on her own, but wants her husband to agree with her, to back her up. This does not necessarily mean that she wants him to tell her what to do, but just that she needs to feel close to him and to share with him something that usually does not bother a man at work too much. A good husband grants her enough time and does listen. A really good husband has worked out that she rarely comes right out with it and says what she wants or what is bothering her. She drops hints. And the irritating thing for the husband is that she expects him to work all this out for himself. That, for her, is a major proof that he has noticed her and taken consideration of her needs, that he loves her. When the husband cannot or will not do this, she nearly always assumes that he does not love her. To her, most things she wants seem such little things to ask, why can't he even give her that? Women generally listen hard and pick up all sorts of signals and body language to see behind the words to what people feel and what they are thinking. They frequently know intuitively what people want or need. This is a skill that many men do not emphasize or develop. However, on the downside, women can become overcome with emotions over small matters and draw sweeping, dramatic conclusions out of a shrug or a sigh, something which is exasperating and baffling to a husband. Husbands could perhaps remember that it is highly likely that throughout her childhood his wife had a close friend, someone to whom she talked about everything, especially feelings, likes and dislikes, loves and tragedies. They may have lived together through the turmoils and passions of heroines in books and magazines. They shared and empathized about everything, including the most intimate emotions. When childhood is left behind and the girl marries, she very frequently expects the husband to become her new best friend and take on the role of confidant where her old girlfriends left off. When the man proves unable to do this, she is often perhaps unconsciously disappointed and feels left out and lonely. Women often talk away to their friends, pouring everything out, not hesitating to reveal their fears and troubles. They do not expect their friends to judge them, merely to share their emotions. It may well be that in marriage a woman also has a very strong need for an empathetic listener, but she has very likely forgotten that her husband, coming back to the home after a day on the outside, has his own fears, worries, and need for solitude and refreshment. Tired husbands will often ignore the petty day-to-day squabbles and upsets, assuming that if there is a real problem, the wife will speak up. The tired wife gets upset over the fact that he is ignoring her obvious state of distress, tiredness, and hints. Many husbands do not really listen to feelings, but to problems and how to solve them. Their reaction to her tirade is usually that she is overreacting, her problems are small and very easy to solve. And the wife explodes again. How dare he consider her problems to be small? She is doing all this, sacrificing all her life for him, slaving away in drudgery, etc., etc., for him. Irritated, the husband tends to withdraw, shut out her noise and the noise from the kids, and retreat to somewhere quiet where he can put his feet up and relax, and maybe mull over his own day's problems.
What do husbands really expect from their wives? This is another matter that really needs sorting out. They usually need to feel that the health of their families is in safe hands. They expect the wife to buy the proper food and cook proper meals and keep them fit and well. They expect their wives to make some effort to look nice on their behalf. They expect wives to watch the clock and get themselves ready at appropriate times. Of course, if they break the rules and pop up unexpectedly or bring people in without notice, they are asking for a nasty surprise.
They expect their wives to keep their home looking decent, welcoming, and clean. Children and toys all over the place can be a major irritant. The answer is usually to have a playroom, if possible, or at least to keep a large toy box handy where everything can be slung in quickly out of the way. They expect their wives to be pleased to see them, gentle and unharassing, and they hope that they will not be indifferent towards them in the marital bed. In many cases, a wife's lack of enthusiasm or sometimes frigidity may well be due to the husband's lack of consideration and understanding. But wives should be aware that their indifference hurts the husband, and a show of distaste might kill his potency or even cause him to be attracted to someone else. Husbands have the right to trust their wives and not catch them out doing things or seeing people that the wife knows the husband disapproves of. It is not lawful for a woman who believes in Allah to allow anyone into her husband's home whom he dislikes. She should not refuse to share her husband's bed. She should not strike him. If he is more in the wrong than she should plead with him until he is satisfied. If he accepts her pleading, well and good, and her plea will be accepted by Allah. While if he is not reconciled to her, her plea will have reached Allah in any case. Hadith from Al-Hakim. So once again, don't seethe with resentment because the wife is not doing what you want. Communicate, "Darling, I used to love it when you put on a fresh dress and perfume just for me. I know the sort of day you have just had, but when you still do it, just to please me, I know that you really do still care about me. Notice the necessary ingredients of your statement. Express your hurt, acknowledge their hard work and sacrifice, state your need for love and respect, and watch the results." Seems too much of a performance. After a little practice, the skills just come naturally. They are the basic good manners adab of Islamic marriage. 8. A bank balance in heaven.
Allah has purchased from the believers their wealth and their souls, so that heaven might be theirs. 9:111.
Marriage is not a bed of roses, or at least, if you wish to look at it in such terms, it is a bed of roses with plenty of thorns in it. The rest of this little book is an attempt to shed some light on what makes so many marriages go wrong, so that hopefully you who are starting out can avoid a few of the pitfalls. The true Muslim is conscious of God at every moment of the day, during every event of life. And He is present with us not only during the grand times, when we are in the limelight, and are patted on the back when we are successful, but also in those far more frequent times when we are successful, but also in those far more frequent times when we are slogging away, coping with boredom and frustration at work or at home, and putting up with things we do not really like. He does not only see the things that are done in public, but as Al-Basir, the all-seeing, beholds even the tiniest things that are done behind closed doors. Very many of those private things have to do with marriage and family. It is vitally important for believers to be realistic. It is all too easy for Muslims to read book after book extolling the wonders and virtues of Islamic marriage, when the briefest of glimpses into the actual private state of affairs in some homes can be horrifying. Life amid the stresses of the modern world, particularly in our high-speed cities, places unprecedented strains on relationships. There is no point in being complacent and pointing to the high rate of infidelity and breakdown of non-Muslim marriages. Many of the same pressures are starting to bear down on us. Only by remembering the Islamic virtues of compassion, selflessness, and consideration, and being aware that we will be judged for every cruelty, can we steer a safe course through the stormy waters of today's social environment. When the blessed Prophet's wife Aisha, may God be pleased with her, was asked about the Prophet's character Kuluk, she responded that his character was the Quran. His conformity to the enlightened and wise norm of behavior counseled by God was complete. She knew that there was no detail, however small, of his private life which would show him up in public as practicing double standards. But the reality for lesser Muslims often falls far short of this ideal, if their practice of Islam is left behind with their umbrella when they step through the front door on returning home. Muslims should realize that Allah knows not only our actions, but also our thoughts and motives. He knows the treason of the eyes and what the hearts conceal. 40:19. When people do wrong in secret and think that they have got away with it successfully, they are wrong. Allah has seen everything they did. Similarly, when people strive to do the right thing and sometimes get downhearted because they think that nobody has noticed or appreciated what they did, they are also wrong. This is an enormous responsibility for us and also a great joy. An awareness of it can be the saving of our sanity in a bad marriage. When, sadly, some marriages begin to go wrong, it brings enormous consolation to the wronged party to know that God is witness to every aspect of the situation. It can give them just the strength they need to persevere until better times. A good marriage, to the Prophet peace be upon him, was not just a case of a man and woman rubbing along reasonably well together. It meant a living, creative, and dynamic powerhouse of goodness that would spill over and bless all who came into contact with it. A house was not just a house, it was a place of refuge, of consolation, of peace, of plenty, of provision. A bird could shelter in its eaves, or a lost traveler find shelter within its walls. A wild animal could expect to be fed at its back door, and a tired husband returning from the world outside would be welcomed at the gate. Allah has said that husband and wife should be like garments for one another, 187. The point of a garment is to give warmth, protection, and decency, and in marriage terms, this includes intimacy, comfort, and protection from being tempted to look elsewhere. Garments are not held together by a few big knots, but by thousands of little stitches of thread. It is the continuing accumulation of small words and acts each day of our lives that clothe us and reveal what we really are. Some clothing is uncomfortable and restrictive, and we are only too eager to throw it off. We need to clothe ourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, good humor, and patience. Put on the belt of saber, wind on the turban of tawbah, keep on the shirt of zuhd, and work hard in it. You will not travel without the sandals of fear and hope in God, nor without the staff called yakin, or the provisions of Taqwa Sheikh Muhammad ibn al-Habib. The marriage and the home, if organized and run under the eye of Allah Almighty, should radiate certain qualities. A stranger coming to a submitted home should feel this atmosphere right away, that no matter how weary the occupants, they are never too busy to be kind. When both partners feel this atmosphere and observe the happiness and relaxation of their guests as they eat and pray with them, they should know that their marriage is on the right course.
For those people who are having difficulties with their marriages, they might like to use a little though technique to help them get their priorities right and boost their morale when the road is getting rough.
The Holy Quran itself offers the following though technique as our aid and encouragement when beginning to get depressed, or even when sunk in the depths of despair. Whatever good you send forth for your souls, you will find it with Allah. For Allah is all-seeing of what you do, 110.
Muslims find it helpful to think of the hereafter and paradise as a kind of heavenly bank, and all the good things you are granted to do as payments that are going to be deposited in that bank.
Allah does not permit the reward to be lost of those who do good, nor do they spend anything in charity, small or great, but that the deed is inscribed to their credit, that Allah may requite their deed with the best possible reward. 121. In the Quran, Allah frequently uses this thought picture, talking of either your good deeds or your sins which your hands send on before you see, e.g. 110, 78:40, 81:14. In other words, if you have done something wrong, then you have indeed brought down your balance. But this is not the end of the world. God will allow you to repay that debt. Every time a person genuinely repents of what they did wrong and makes an effort to put it right, the debt is repaid. Every time a Muslim turns to Allah and genuinely seeks forgiveness, he or she is forgiven. Sometimes, when the debt proves too overwhelming, He will even excuse you the debt because God is God and not a human bank manager. Had it not been for the grace and mercy of Allah towards you, you would surely have been among the lost, 264. Allah Ta'ala is far more generous and forgiving than human beings. The important thing is that in trying to live the Muslim life, you keep on building up your balance of good payments day by day in the little things you do and think as well as the big one. That way, when you reach the end of each day and cast your mind back over its successes and failures, you will be able to see how you are moving steadily forward. This becomes vitally important if you marry someone who does not move steadily forward with you. It can happen that a marriage will go wrong, as you have perhaps seen among your friends. Of course, it usually takes two to make an argument, and we all know that few marriages can really break down without there being fault on both sides. But sometimes the fault really is very heavily weighted on one side or the other, and the perplexed partner who is still trying hard to keep the marriage going can become worn down and depressed. If that is happening to you, remember that bank balance in heaven, and remember also that every time you did not return a bad answer or pay back evil with evil, a little extra credit gets entered on your record. Every individual is responsible for their own record. When we face judgment, our books will be opened, and we will see straight away what we did with our lives. When we live intimately with another person, it is all too easy to try to mix up our record with that person's, to try and mold them in the way that we believe suits us, to try to make them do what we want them to do. This might work, but as so many married people know to their cost, it works only rarely, and the price can be high. You have to stand on your own and build your own record. If your husband or wife does something that hurts you, this bad deed or thought goes down on their record and not yours. Guard yourselves against a day when no soul shall avail another, nor shall intercession be accepted for that other, nor shall compensation be taken for it, nor shall anyone be helped from outside 248. What is entered on your record is how you reacted to that particular test. Did you fly off the handle or consider the truth of the matter with patience and justice? If your reaction was a successful one in the Islamic sense, then the badness of your partner is turned into merit for you, even though you have been hurt.
These words from the Holy Quran imply the correct way to conduct your Islamic marriage, partnership, and household.
Whatever you are given is but an enjoyment for this life, while that which is with God is better and more lasting for those who believe and put their trust in their Lord. Those who avoid the greater transgressions and shameful deeds, and who, when they are angry, still forgive. Those who listen to their Lord and do establish the prayer, and whose affairs are settled by mutual consultation among themselves, and who spend in charity out of what we bestow upon them, and those who, when an oppressive wrong is inflicted upon them, help and defend themselves. The recompense for an injury is an injury like unto it, but whoever forgives and makes reconciliation, his reward is due from God. And God loves not those who act unjustly. 42:36-40. When someone wrongs you, you may not be able to put it right or make them a friend again, but it will be an enormous consolation to know that you have a friend who never changes in his concern and justice towards you, and whose eye sees all. Without this awareness, marriage can be difficult indeed. If your main aim in marriage is to please your partner, then you could be heading for disappointment and distress, for human beings are odd creatures with fickle moods and fancies. Many disappointed husbands and wives know that no matter what they do or how hard they try, the partner is never pleased. In fact, quite often the more they do to try to earn that approval, the more it irritates the partner, and the less likely they are to get it. Human nature can be that perverse. However, if your main aim is to please Allah, then you will hopefully be able to withstand any bad patches, maintain your loving relationship with sympathy and patience, and remain confident that He who sees all will understand everything that comes to pass. 9. How to turn sex into sadaqah. Women shall have rights similar to the rights upon them, according to what is equitable and just, and men have a degree of advantage over them. 2:216. They do indeed. This passage of the Holy Quran was revealed in connection with the rights of women following a divorce, but it also has a general sense. One basic right of every person taking on a contract never to have sex other than with their own legitimate partner is that each spouse should therefore provide sexual fulfillment and imta to the other as part of the bargain. Now, every man knows what sexual things please him, but some men, particularly those who have not been married before, and are therefore lacking experience, don't seem to know much about how to give the same pleasure to the woman. Even worse, some men do know, but they can't be bothered to make the effort. Yet this is vital if a marriage is to succeed and not just be a disappointing burden for the woman, and it is a vital part of one's Islamic duty. It is not acceptable for a Muslim man just to satisfy himself while ignoring his wife's needs. Experts agree that the basic psychological need of a man is respect, while that of a woman is love. Neither respect nor love are things that can be forced, they have to be worked for and earned. The Prophet, peace be upon him, stated that in one's sexual intimacy with one's life partner, there is sadaqah. God's Messenger, peace be upon him, said, "In the sexual act of each of you, there is a sadaqah." The companions replied, "O Messenger of God, when one of us fulfills his sexual desire, will he be given a reward for that?" And he said, "Do you not think that were he to act upon it unlawfully, he would be sinning? Likewise, if he acts upon it lawfully, he will be rewarded." Muslim. This hadith only makes sense if the sexual act is raised above the mere animal level. What is the magic ingredient that turns sex into sadaqah, that makes it a matter of reward or punishment from Allah? It is by making one's sex life more than simple physical self-gratification. It is by thought for pleasing Allah, by unselfish care for one's partner. A husband that cannot understand this will never be fully respected by his wife, and vice versa. Neither spouse should ever act in a manner that would be injurious or harmful to their conjugal life. Nikah is the sacred tie between husband and wife, that sincere and devoted love without which they cannot attain happiness and peace of mind. Of his signs is this, that he created for you spouses that you might find rest in them, and he ordained between you love and mercy. 30:21. Now, every Muslim knows that a man has a right on his wife. However, because nikah is a contract never to seek sexual satisfaction outside the marriage bond, Islam commands not only the women but the men in this respect, and makes it clear that if a husband is not aware of the urges and needs of his wife, he will be committing a sin by depriving her of her rights. According to all four orthodox jurists, it is incumbent upon the husband to keep his wife happy and pleased in this respect. Likewise, it is essential for the wife to satisfy the desire of the husband. Neither should reject the other unless there is some lawful excuse. Now, it is fairly easy for a woman to satisfy a man and make herself available to him, even if she is not really in the mood. It is far harder for a man to satisfy a woman if he is not in the mood. And this is where an important aspect of male responsibility needs to be brought to every Muslim man's attention and stressed strongly. The jurists believed that a woman's private parts needed protecting tosin. What they meant was that it was important for a Muslim husband to satisfy his wife's sexual needs so that she would not be tempted to commit zina out of despair or frustration. A Muslim wife is not merely a lump of flesh without emotions or feelings, just there to satisfy a man's natural urges. On the contrary, her body contains a soul no less important in God's sight than her husband's. Her heart is very tender and delicate, and crude or rough manners would hurt her feelings and drive away love. The husband would be both foolish and immoral to act in any way unpalatable to her natural temperament, and a man selfishly seeking his own satisfaction without considering that of his wife is a selfish bore. In fact, according to a hadith, 3 things are counted inadequacies in a man. Firstly, meeting someone he would like to get to know, and taking leave of him before learning his name and his family. Secondly, rebuffing the generosity that another shows to him. And thirdly, going to his wife and having intercourse with her before talking to her and gaining her intimacy, satisfying his need from her before she has satisfied her need from him. Dalami. This is another of the things implied by the saying that one's wife is a tilth unto you. 22:23. The imagery is that of a farmer taking care of his fields, according to Maulana Abul Allah Mujudi. The farmer sows the seed in order to reap the harvest, but he does not sow it out of season or cultivate it in a manner which will injure or exhaust the soil. He is wise and considerate and does not run riot. Afzalur Rahman, Quranic Sciences, London, 1981 p. 285. Likewise, in the case of husband and wife, the husband should not just take hold of his wife and drop the seed and finish the business of procreation. The damage in this case could sometimes be irreparable because the woman, unlike a farm, is very sensitive and has emotions, feelings, and strong passions which need full satisfaction and attention in a proper and appropriate manner. Afzalur Rahman p. 286. If this is not taken into consideration, and the wife is not properly prepared to start lovemaking, or is unsatisfied when it is finished, there could be many psychological and physiological complications leading to frigidity and other abnormalities. Indeed, many husbands eventually become disappointed with their wives, believing them to be frigid or unable to respond to their activities, unlike the sirens on the film or TV screen, and they wonder what is wrong with them. A possible explanation will follow in a moment. Allah created male and female from a single soul in order that man might live with her in Serenity 7:189 and not in unhappiness, frustration, and strife. If your marriage is frankly awful, then you must ask yourself how such a desperate and tragic scenario could be regarded by anyone as half the faith. According to a hadith, not one of you should fall upon his wife like an animal, but let there first be a messenger between you. And what is that messenger? They asked, and he replied, kisses and words, Gilami.
These kisses and words do not just include foreplay once intimacy has commenced. To set the right mood, little signals should begin well in advance so that the wife has a clue as to what is coming and is pleasantly expectant and also has adequate time to make herself clean, attractive, and ready.
As regards intimacy itself, all men know that they cannot achieve sexual fulfillment if they are not aroused. They should also realize that it is actually harmful and painful for the female organs to be used for sex without proper preparation. In simple biological terms, the woman's private parts need a kind of natural lubrication before the sexual act takes place. For this, Allah has created special glands, known to modern doctors as the Bartholin glands, which provide the necessary oils. It is still possible to read old-fashioned advice to husbands that a desirable wife should be dry, which is remarkable ignorance, and makes one really grieve for the poor wives of such inconsiderate men. Just as no one would dream of trying to run an engine without the correct lubricating fluids, it is the same through the creative will of Allah, with the parts of the female body designed for sexual intimacy. A husband should know how to stimulate the production of these oils in his wife, or at the very least allow her to use some artificial oils. This lack of knowledge or consideration is where so many marital problems frequently arise. As Imam al-Ghazali says, sex should begin with gentle words and kissing, and Imam al-Zabidi adds, this should include not only the cheeks and lips, and then he should caress the breasts and nipples, and every part of her body. Zabidi, Ithaf al-Sada al-Mudakin v. 372. Most men will not need telling this, but it should be remembered that failure to observe the Islamic practice is to neglect or deny the way Allah has created women. Insulting a wife with bad marital manners. Firstly, a husband must overcome his shyness enough to actually look at his wife and pay attention to her. If he cannot bring himself to follow this sunnah, it is an insult to her and extremely hurtful. Personal intimacy is a minefield of opportunities to hurt each other glancing at the watch, a yawn at the wrong moment, appearing bored, and so on. A husband's duty is to convince his wife that he does love her, and this can only be done by word, constantly repeated word. I might add such is the irritating nature of women, and by looking and touching. Many people believe that the expression in the eyes reveals much of the human soul. Certainly the lover's gaze is a most endearing and treasured thing. Many wives yearn for that gaze of love, even after they have been married for years. If you cannot bring yourself to look at her while paying attention to her, she can only interpret this as a sign that you do not really love her. And even though it may be irritating to you and seem quite superfluous, most women are deeply moved when a man actually tells her that he loves her. Sex is clean. A modest upbringing is part of good character. The Prophet, peace be upon him, himself said, modesty brings nothing but good bukhari and muslin. But another, also important part of Islamic teaching says that all of Allah's creation is beautiful and pure, particularly when it is part of the body of human beings, who are designed as His deputies upon the earth. In some religions, people traditionally believed that the woman's private parts are in some way unclean or dirty or even evil. In the Islamic view, this is nonsense. They are simply part of the way Allah created women. To criticize or to dislike this is to criticize our Maker himself, who out of his kindness gave women this equipment and opportunity for the physical expression of love and union. If the woman is halal for him, he may look at all parts of her body as a bidi, Itaf al-Sada al-Murakin v. 331. A husband is permitted to look at the private parts of his wife Karashi, Shar Mokatasa Qalil Roman 3, for there is a very relevant ayah in the Quran which says, if you take a dislike to them, it may be that you dislike something through which Allah is bringing about much good. 419. Anyone who finds his wife's sexual equipment distasteful is insulting her creator and ignoring his plan and wise reasons. Sex is not dirty if the couples are not dirty, either physically or in harboring dirty thoughts of self-gratification and the abuse of the spouse. This should not be a problem for Muslims who have such clear guidance on personal hygiene that their private parts are washed several times a day, which is not the case in any other religion. But in addition to the usual Muslim hygiene, if a man does feel that his wife is dirty, it is a simple matter to exert a husband's right as the boss and give her the order to wash. At the same time, the man has the duty to make sure he is clean himself.
Some women feel exactly the same qualms about the cleanliness of a man's private parts as he might do for hers. Don't forget that a man actually does urinate and spend his seed from the same orifice, which is not true for the woman. Her urine comes from quite a different place than the one intended for physical intimacy. It is perfectly possible for a husband to touch a woman's vagina and clitoris and not touch the part from which urine comes at all.
The Blessed Prophet actually recommended regularly removing the pubic hairs, a tricky operation for the woman, but preferable for a clean and stimulating attitude to sexual coupling. If after taking a shower before sex, and perhaps using a favorite perfume, the man still thinks the woman is dirty or unclean, then he is being ignorant and unrighteously ungrateful and critical of Allah's creation and intentions, and is neglecting his own duty. What about those wrinkles? A good Muslim does not waste time complaining to the Creator about the physical bag of tricks he or she has been given for this lifetime. It is a complete waste of tinny for a man as thin as a stick to wish that he were a rugby player, or someone with blue eyes wishing they had brown, or someone with ginger hair trying to dye it another color, or a short person trying desperately to be tall, or an aging person wishing to be young again, and so on. Although we can sometimes make marginal improvements with great effort, basically we are as we are, warts and all.
The amazing thing is that it is not the appearance of our physical bodies that makes our partner love us.
Certainly, it is true that human beings probably cannot help an instant reaction when they look at another human being for the first time. But even in very materialistic societies, people's looks are often not the reason why they fall in love. They need have little to do with a happy marriage. A man who marries a woman for her wealth and beauty will be deprived of that wealth and beauty, while the man who marries her for her religion shall receive from God her wealth and beauty too. Hadith in Tabarani. Being unduly concerned about any aspect of one's looks can have a very detrimental effect on a marriage, especially if the person's desire to change something or other in their body overwhelms them and becomes their chief concern. It is the duty of all of us to make the best of what we have, but it is a subtle form of shirk to live in an attitude of complaint to our Creator for what we have been given. O friend, be neither anguished nor distressed. Surrender to God's decrees, and you will be praised and rewarded. Be content with what He has ordained and disposed. Do not dispute the decree of He who is the Lord of the high throne, Imam al-Haddad. Nevertheless, loving people realize that those they love are often very sensitive about certain things. Having stated that husbands should pay their wives the compliment of actually looking at them, particularly during intimate moments, it also needs to be stated that many women appreciate the cover of darkness and only feel comfortable being intimate in the dark when all their warts and all become invisible. Women are sensitive things, signs of aging or physical imperfections, little defects like double chins, rolls of unwanted spare tire around the belly, all sorts of spots and blemishes. These are just as upsetting to a woman as flapping ears, pimples, the inability to grow hair, being too thin or too short are to the male ego. Sometimes the darkness is kind to us and loosens up our inhibitions. How can I make my woman happy and satisfied? It is important for men to realize that women are not all the same, but are actually individual living beings. They do not have automatic response mechanisms, but their responses are subtle and are triggered by all sorts of things. Contrary to a very common male myth, The love of a woman for a man has nothing to do with the size or shape of his private parts. Most women do not find the common male fixation with his size at all endearing, and might even be frightened by something they thought was too much for them, even though we all know that babies, some with heads the size of a grapefruit, have to come out of that same channel. In any case, unless the erect member is less than 3 inches long, it will still be perfectly capable of bringing her to orgasm, since the deeper parts of the vagina are not very sensitive. As regards the man's body, unexpected things like the shape of his arm, the fineness of his hands, the way he stands or walks, his hips, the strength of his legs, the nape of his neck, the fine hairs on his cheek, all these things stir a woman's longing response far more than contemplation of his actual sexual equipment. Basically, what attracts a woman most is man's manliness. It may even be his awkward shyness, or his cussed determination, or his ability to take command. Certainly, if the man is a good leader and dominant partner, the most wonderful thing about marriage with him will be his ability to descend from his lofty heights and actually do and say things for no other reason than to please his wife. The little gift, the bunch of flowers, is a prime example. The woman doesn't actually care tuppence for the flowers. What gives her such wonderful pleasure is the thought that her man has actually taken the time and trouble to think about her. That is certainly one thing that would make her love him, so long as it is done in a Muslim way and not as a bribe or other sweetener. Give gifts to each other and you will love each other Bakari. There is a lovely story of the blessed Prophet listening to 11 women. They all complained about their husbands, but the 11th one, Zara, said, "I have no words enough to praise my husband. He has covered my ears with ornaments and fed me so well that my lean and thin arms have become plump. In short, he has provided me with everything to keep me happy, and I am happy. I am very lucky. I talk to him freely and frankly, but he never objects. I sleep comfortably until the morning, and I eat delicious food." Then the blessed Prophet said to Aisha, "I am like Abu Zara for you."
The importance of kindness to your woman.
A person embarking on a journey across strange territory will be well advised to consult a map. Similarly, it is a good idea for anyone embarking on marriage for the first time to have a rough idea of what to do and how long to do it for. For a Muslim man contracting nikah, this is a duty. A man getting married can probably already imagine what pleases him and what it is necessary for him to do or experience, and for how long for him to achieve satisfaction and a good, restful night's sleep to follow. He already knows that if he is turned on by something, and then is forced to cool it down, turn it off, and not be fulfilled, this takes a considerable effort of will, and is not a pleasant business at all. Imagine a hungry cat being shown a plateful of food. Once the food is seen and smelt, the cat goes crazy to have it. You hold the cat back, but the instant you let go, it leaps upon the food. It is perfectly natural for it to do so. Can you imagine how unjust it would be to a female cat if the male was always allowed to finish the meal and eat just as much as he liked, while the female always had the plate snatched away from her after she had just taken a bite at it?
Nobody who kept a pet cat would ever dream of making this distinction between their male and female animals. They would see and agree straight away that it was gross cruelty and totally in opposition to the will of Allah, who has counseled kindness and consideration to all creatures.
But sometimes men do this to their women, and it is a gross dereliction of their duty. Sometimes human beings develop one particular blindness. They forget that they also have a biological nature, male and female, and that all their needs and urges and intuitions are implanted in them by their dear Lord, the benevolent Creator. As regards sexual fulfillment, if a man knows that he is not going to be able to achieve it, he is likely to make a considerable effort not to let his body become aroused in the first place, or if it is, he will probably have worked out some means acceptable to himself of satisfying the urge aroused, even though he may feel unhappy about this. He may not realize that real sex is not like the films, and that it could take between 15-30 minutes to fully arouse his wife, and that it is gross cruelty to make no attempt to do this at all, or to start off and then finish abruptly. If a husband has rushed to climax before his wife, he should not abandon his efforts, but continue his caresses until she is satisfied. If you love your wife, is she not worth those few minutes of your day? Allah created the sexual urge in us, and it is probably the strongest of all the urges He created. He intended it to be used, and He intended us to form a happy marriage bond with a life partner, so there is nothing wrong whatsoever in thinking through ways of achieving the best in marital happiness. A happy and fulfilled night life leads to better sleep, contentment, a better work routine during the day, confidence, and a whole range of other benefits. It should be obvious that a happy sex life is as much a part of Islam as prayers or fasting. How to help a wife achieve satisfaction, peace, and love. It is all too easy for a man to be aroused and to charge into sexual intimacy, and because of his excitement, for it all to be over in a matter of moments. If this is the case, the woman is likely to be frustrated and unhappy, even if she has not the courage or is too polite or shy to say so. If you are a man and have just read the preceding paragraph, and it suddenly occurs to you that this is indeed what you do, but of course it doesn't apply to your wife, she is perfectly happy, then you would be well advised to stop and scrutinize the evidence. How often does she smile and show her contentment? How often does she hurry to please you in all sorts of little ways? How ungrudgingly does she do the boring and unpleasant chores of family life on your behalf? Given a good, attentive lover, she will do the most menial of tasks for him cheerfully. But if he lacks attention, she will gradually be worn down by disappointment and resentment, and the whole pleasure of family life intended by God in His mercy towards us will wither away. Some men mistakenly believe that they cannot help being the way they are. In fact, they may have thought it a compliment to their wives that they are able to rouse themselves and fulfill their urges so speedily. This is nonsense. If you read any medical manual on the subject, you will discover that if a male reaches climax in less than 3 minutes after entering his woman, this is counted as premature ejaculation and is thought of as something that one has to make an effort to cure. On the medical level, there are some useful countermeasures for this common problem. Take a look, for instance, at the Islamic herbal remedies listed in Kiss Ties, the traditional healer, pages 276 for impotence and 278 for premature ejaculation. Another useful way of solving the problem is to raise the significance of your intimacy by setting aside more time for it, rather than leaving it until last thing at night when you are exhausted. It is worth remembering that the traditional time for sex in many Muslim societies is not the night, but the afternoon siesta. This is not so easy if you are at work on a 9 to 5 job, but perhaps occasionally you could go to bed an hour earlier. It is highly insulting to a wife if the only attention she ever gets is an abrupt announcement of her husband's urges, perhaps after he has sat up late watching TV, after which he rolls into bed to get the whole business over with as quickly as possible before he drops off to sleep. Similarly, there is no justification for using one's religious devotions as an excuse to deprive a loving partner. According to Abu Sa'd, the Prophet peace be upon him once rebuked the wife of Safwan ibn al-Nyadal for being over-pious to the detriment of her marriage. She used to read 2 long surahs during her night prayer, keeping her husband waiting, and she fasted frequently without his permission, which made her tired and prevented any opportunity for sex during the day, sexual activity being forbidden while fasting. The Blessed Prophet ruled in favor of the husband, recommending that she limit her recitation to 1 surah and only fasted with her husband's permission. Similarly, when the Prophet heard that an ascetic companion, Abdullah ibn Amr, was in the habit of praying all night and fasting all day, he told him to moderate his devotions, pointing out that your eye has a right over you, your guests have a right over you, and your wife has a right over you, Bakari. This hadith should be taken seriously. Many Muslim wives in nuclear families know only too well the long hours of loneliness while their husbands are away at the mosque, and how frequently they dawdle with their friends even if the last prayer is very late, and sometimes fail to come to bed until the wife is already asleep or is so tired that she is no longer interested. The Blessed Prophet's own practice was not to remain in the mosque or with others after the last prayer of the day, but to leave the mosque and return home. It is a sunnah to sleep quite early and to rise early as well. If some of the above reads like a comment on your own attitude or activities, then you would do well to examine your conscience. Nobody is suggesting that a normal marriage has to be a constant round of physical gymnastics at every moment of the day, merely that the legitimate needs of both partners must be taken into consideration. A good Muslim woman will do her best to see that her man is happy and content. The good Muslim man must know that he has exactly the same duty towards his wife. Sometimes he fails in this duty simply because he is a selfish man and poor Muslim, even though he may find time for his 5 prayers. Sometimes, tragically, Muslim men can fail out of simple ignorance of what their responsibilities entail and make themselves suffer as well as their wives, quite needlessly. This is not what Allah intended for either of them in their marriage, and with a little effort and knowledge, it could so easily be put right. If a man is consistently refusing to provide the answer to his wife's due for his kind attention, he must realize that he will find some awkward questions to answer when he eventually faces judgment, and the books are open to reveal all no matter how shaming. He may have thought of himself as the best of Muslims without realizing the truth of the words of the Prophet. The best of you are those who are kindest to their wives and families. Imagine the shock at the end of a pious lifetime of prayer and charity, of discovering that you had actually been guilty of cruelty towards your wife all those years, and were now called to account for it. Thankfully, every day is a new day, and it is never too late to make a fresh start and put things right. A Muslim's repentance is accepted until he gives the death rattle. Hadith in Al-Hakim, Mustadrak. Conclusion. Once sex has become a chore and a duty, the marriage is well on its way to being dead. If the man's efforts actually cause the woman pain or distaste, she will soon avoid any intimacy at all and will use any excuse to get out of it. Headaches, weak heart, rheumatism, you name it, she'll have it. In fact, a real sexual relationship is so good for you. It would help to heal all these conditions, since it is good healthy activity that raises the heart rate and stimulates the lungs, and takes the mina off disturbing problems and brings spiritual wholeness, serenity, and contentment. The considerate Muslim man soon learns how to make his wife happy, and in doing so, refuses to get anxious and overawed about his own performance. A good Muslim wife will never despise a husband for his physical equipment or lack of expertise, so long as he is loving and considerate towards her. And if they married as virgins, there would be no unfavorable comparisons for either of them to make. If a good Muslim marriage is to be sadaqah for the spouse and pleasing in the eyes of God, it is no use one partner seething with frustration and then finally cracking up. Both of them should try to find gentle ways of supplying feedback to the other, not to be interpreted as criticism, dissatisfaction, or hostility, which is what it becomes if left to ferment for too long, but as the only way to learn and grow together, as sanctioned and willed for us by Allah. May Allah forgive this author for raising topics that are sensitive and private and discussing them in a way that some might think incorrect and distasteful. But we know that many Muslims nowadays are asking about these matters, and it is the sana'ah to make useful knowledge known, whatever it might be. Allah Ta'ala decreed that creation should be set up in pairs complementing each other in harmony, and wished only happiness and peace for us. Therefore, we should all make it our jihad to create happy and fulfilled marriages, in the sight of Him in whose hand lie our souls. May everything we do be pleasing to Him, and may He bless us and bring us to fulfillment, serenity, and completion. Amen.